All right, everybody, we should be live and on for our next developer cast here on the Game Wisdom channel. I am Josh Placer, and for those of you regulars watching, I'm back on the old headset due to some sound-related shenanigans. But they can't stop us from having, this will be, I think, my third cast this week, as we are all still stuck inside, so it gives us plenty of time for these lovely chats. And my guests tonight are developers working on Bartlow's Dread Machine. This is a game that was announced at, I think it was the New York Game Awards, and there was going to be a whole discussion about it at GDC, which unfortunately was not meant to be. So, please welcome to the podcast, Clayton and Matt. How are you guys doing?
Doing good. How are you?
I am hanging in there. I'm sure everyone's starting to get stir crazy very shortly here. We'll see how long everyone lasts.
Yeah, I think a few weeks ago, if I said "How are you?" or "How are you doing?" people would say "Great." Now they'll tell me I can't find ketchup. So it's, yeah.
I did have to brave the supermarket over the weekend to get ketchup. The epic quest for ketchup.
Yeah, they limit how many per person at our store. I mean, the shelves are fine, but they certain you can sort of see what things society truly values based on those like one per customer things.
Yeah,
apparently breakfast sandwiches. Yeah,
pizza is in a rare commodity at my supermarket right now. All the frozen pizzas. It's definitely been one of those very strange times, and the only good thing is that because I already work from home, it's just been like I already don't go outside, so I can avoid all the apocalyptic news right here.
Yeah, I've been in an industry that celebrates not going anywhere or seeing anyone, so I think we're ready for this.
Oh yeah, we're all prepared. The gamers will survive anything basically, as long as we have internet. If that goes, then we're going into the bad times.
Yeah. Fewer people will visit my Animal Crossing town then.
Oh no.
Oh, very sad.
But it's great to have you guys on. Clay and I, we spoke on a cast. It was I think 2-3 years ago. It was right around the time of the Voodoo Vince remake. And
yeah, that would have been three years.
Oh, jeez. Which is 8 years in game dev space. I've lost track.
Pretty much, yeah. They've been hard years.
Yeah. I can hear the kid in the background. But it is great to have you guys on, and we certainly have a lot to discuss. And I do have footage of Bartlow's Dread Machine that will show on the stream in a minute. But before we get to that, family knows to get loud whenever people are recording or streaming. It's just how things work.
Oh yeah, I'm gonna mute myself when I'm not talking. I think there's gonna be kids in the background.
It's still not the worst thing. We had ice cream trucks, lawn mowers, and motorcycles at some point. So the cast is well aware of how outside noise can mess with things. But I'm going to throw over to you guys. If you don't mind introducing yourselves and kind of your both your backgrounds in game dev and what you're kind of working on right now with Bartlow.
Sure. Matt, you want to go first?
Sure. I'm the project lead at Tribe Toy, and I'm helping build this thing.
Wow. That's I guess I'll do the background thing, 'cause I guess just to recap from when I was here before. I'm Clayton Kozlarek, and I'm the creator of the concept and the initial idea of Dread Machine. I've made my own games through my own company for on and off, I'd say, since 2003. And I worked with Matt here. Actually, we both worked at Microsoft together for 5 years. And after Matt went to go start, Tribe Toy and make his own cool stuff, we'd stayed in touch, and we talked a lot about maybe working on something. And I'd had this concept for the better part of actually more than 10 years about doing something that's sort of like this odd mechanical game from the year 1907, and what would that be like, and how would it play, and how would it look, and it just seemed like a really opportune time after they finished Bow to Blood, their VR game, that we might want to team up and build something together. And of course, because of that project, they had such amazing tools and techniques, and all these great processes worked out, and it was kind of cool to be able to sort of waltz in and absolutely exploit the fact that they had all this established cool stuff set up that made it so much faster and easier to prototype and build the game. So yeah, about a year ago we started working on the game, and yeah, we're cruising along right now. I think we're not too far from having all the content in, and then hopefully spend some time doing some polish and tuning and stuff like that.
Great. So you said that you guys have been working on the game for about a year now, then. And for the people watching, when was the official announcement for the game?
That was January. So about 8-9 months after we started working on the game, technically we announced the game in January. Yeah, it would have been I think the 21st or so of January of this year.
All right, great.
Was the announce. So yeah, we kind of wanted to have enough of it done and enough of the game sort of under our belt before we started really talking about it.
And since the game was going to be announced more at GDC, so not a lot of people had a chance to look at it, I have the announcement trailer here. So we're going to switch footage. Sorry for people watching, and for Shark, I'm afraid you're not in this cast this time. I'm using our show demo from when we do our live show on Sundays. But here is the footage. Another major point of game development, always being willing and ready to adapt when the need comes. We gotta be very flexible here. And I'll release the music just a little bit. And we can let the trailer go. So, from what you guys were describing, and from what I saw in the press release, it looks to be very much like pretty much like a diegetic kind of UI and design, that we're essentially playing a game within a game.
Yeah, a little bit. The notion that you're sitting in front of this actual mechanical device has always been kind of sort of at the center of the idea. And then the notion that we're not only doing these things that kind of have this old shooting arcade sort of tin toy aesthetic, but the notion that everything has articulation, everything has underlying struts and wires and gears and all those things that sort of justify what you see and explains it, but also adds to, I think, the sort of tactile quality of the game and the charm of the game. And it certainly drives a look too, which I'm so proud of, how this has come together and what the Tribe Toy team has been executing on, because I did design documents and concepts and some really rough mock-ups and things like that over the last 10 years, but they just ran with it and made it all come to life in a way that was, I'd say, better than I could have expected.
Yeah, I gotta say, I love, let me see if I can find that footage of it really fast. Where was it? I love, right here, when it's, the car racing, and you can actually see, the wire, coming off screen to kind of guide the car, make sure, it's still on track kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's like there are those little, coin-op games that were like that, where you would have an actual physical track that would scroll by under a car, and then, we just thought, well, let's just add some kind of cool spy hunter shooting and obstacles and things that get in the way to that. So yeah, I mean, I think Matt and his team just I knew I always wanted vehicles in the game. We had this idea of things you steer or ride around on, just as ways to kind of break the traditional action of the twin stick shooter. And yeah, again, that was it's just so charming to see what that turned into.
Yeah. Oh, wait. We have a bit of a problem here. Apparently, it is not letting it see. Oh, I get it. Maybe because it's an image. That's weird. It's not showing the footage. All right. Well, worst comes to worst, I always have my plan B. Let me do a screen share here. There we go. That's better. All right. I'm going to let the footage play again so people can watch it. Hopefully. Unless YouTube decides to...
I saw it. I saw things move.
What is going on with YouTube now? Why aren't you capturing? Is it actually moving right now?
Not from this side.
Let's see. I think it's working now. I think it's capturing. Okay, good. Oh, again, the joys of on-air tech support and finagling things here. But we'll let the footage play again, then we'll switch back to our regular view here. So, while it's going again, yeah, like you said, so you've had this concept in your head for about 10 years?
Yeah. And normally I don't tend to sit on ideas that long. It's like, you know, as someone who designs games, there's kind of a shelf life to things sometimes, and you know, it's often the people who have their precious idea that they feel like this is the thing, this is it for me. That can almost be unhealthy, you know, if you do that, because you know, really, you know, it's all about the next thing you think of, it's the next idea. But this one kept kind of just coming back. It just kept cropping up, and I kept thinking about it. So I guess there was just something about it, and I'd always kind of hoped. And it's funny because when I've mentioned to friends that I've known for years that, oh, hey, I'm making that mechanical game I've been talking about. And again, there are people who are like, what? You're talking about that 10 years ago. And so yeah, it's and it's not again not the usual course. You know, normally I'd be more interested in, you know, the new things, the new ideas. But this one just sort of had its own. I don't know what you call it. Just had a life of its own. It just wanted to exist.
Great. And for the people who came in late, the picture on the left, that is Clayton, and the picture on the right is Matt. They've been on camera all day for the regular job, so they went for the image. I haven't been on camera all day, and this is my first time on my old headset today, so I am more than happy I am not as photo shy today.
Oh, I haven't actually been on camera, but I'm sparing you all from my family that is going, like, my house is nuts right now. You know, everybody being stuck inside because of the virus thing going on has made things a bit crazy.
Yeah. Fortunately for me, my door in this room is to like offside, so my family walking by, nobody will ever see them unless they come directly in. So that's good. Although we've had like a few people like wander like on set a few times by accident. But from the footage and showing off Bartlow, so the game itself is going to be like focusing on like twin stick shooter, like almost like Smash TV Contra-esque, like run and gun.
Yeah, there's a lot of elements of that, and but I also think there's some interesting sort of change ups to that as well. So because you know, I mean, obviously you wouldn't want everything to be 100% the same every second of the game. The idea that there's areas where it takes on more of like an over-the-shoulder shooting gallery kind of look. There are interior and exterior spaces. There's spaces where there's a lot of cover that the characters can hide behind. So even though it's effectively 2D gameplay, it's tilted into a three-dimensional space. So you get some of the things you get in what you might associate with a more like a tactical kind of a shooter feel. But on top of that is, solid twin stick, serious bullet hell in some levels. So yeah, it's kind of a hybrid, I guess, if you will, of certain influences.
Yeah, we really another influence we looked at outside of the twin stick shooter and the bullet hell genre was just like Castle Crashers and the co-op, the goodness that game is. You know, it has one of the things I love about Castle Crashers is it's always going memorable moment to memorable moment. Like I remember scenes like, oh, I'm on a stagecoach and like getting chased by a giant monster, or I'm riding a deer, or you know, there's always these story events happening and these memorable moments happening that sort of, you know, just keep you engaged. And I think that that's something we really wanted to do to ensure that our levels just like really went from memorable moment to memorable moment, where like guys are jumping out of bushes, or like, you know, the ground collapses out from under you and you start sliding down a hill, you know, and then you get into a car chase and then board a train, and like it's just constantly like, you know, moving from moment to moment and you know, changing up the gameplay.
Adventure for the kids.
And I guess
the co-op thing definitely too is something that I've always loved. I may have so many great memories of playing games. I don't know if people remember way back on the original PlayStation, but there was a game called Loaded on there, which was sort of a top-down co-op shooter, and I just loved playing that with my friends. And even like Baldur's Gate Dark Alliance, and then there's of course Castle Crashers and a bunch of other things that go back even further. And so I've always felt like couch co-op is underserved. I feel like there's just not enough stuff out there that you can sort of play with, you know, your friends or people that you're maybe stuck in a house with. So
yeah, this is the perfect time for that, for sure. Yeah,
you know, or people will be sick of each other. We don't know, but yeah, it's a.
Maybe the games will keep the insanity at bay for at least a little while longer.
Yeah, a constructive way to vent, if you will. So yeah, it could be.
Yeah, I remember Loaded, and we've been playing a lot of like run and gun style games here on the channel. We did a Contra a few weeks ago.
Sweet.
Castle Crasher, that was another really great one. I forgot how hard the Contra games are too. I tried playing a hardcore last night, the Genesis one, and just got demolished. I can do the original one, like that one I am really good at, and then all the other ones I'm just terrible at. I think what's kind of interesting, and I'm sure you guys are probably aware of this, with the whole Steam remote couch co-op feature that they added in like late last year, has been just a really, I think, solid feature for playing some of these games, especially for smaller developers where multiplayer architecture can be very costly or very difficult to implement.
Yeah, I actually used that for the first time a couple days ago. It's a really great feature. We actually used it playing Jackbox, if you ever played the Jackbox games with a bunch of friends. But yeah, it's incredible. I'm super happy they added that, and I think people will get a lot of mileage out of it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's one that we've been using a lot here on the channel. We have Friday nights are our kind of co-op nights, and since my Steam library, thanks to all like press reviews and all that stuff, is like balloon, it basically gives me a chance to go, here, you can join me for all these random games that I picked up over the years. But going back to Bartlow, one thing that you said, Clay, and I thought was kind of interesting, is the danger of sitting on an idea for a very long time. But it's something that we see from we see from independent developers who can spend 5, 10, 15 plus years on a single game, and kind of having, you know, the market move on, or just kind of like running out of steam. No pun intended with the fact we're dealing with a game from 1905 or thereabout. But I guess what kind of led to you guys working, or I guess beginning this game now, or 10 months ago?
Well, I think a few things kind of conspired to get this underway. From my own side, actually dating back to like 3 years, you know, like when I was talking with you about Voodoo Events and all that, that was I self-published that through ID at Xbox. So I think that's what kind of like opened this door to like, oh, I can just make stuff. It didn't need to go through as much of a traditional, you know, like publisher relationship. It was a thing that the scope was reasonable. I think it was something that I could like look at and plan. And again, working with guys like Matt and his team, they're all pros. They're all really good. They go after things, and they're not going to, necessarily spin their wheels on stuff unnecessarily. They kind of know what they're doing. And then Matt, of course, as I said, had his company Tribe Toy. They'd made this just amazing VR game together, and again, we'd always kind of wanted to work together. So it just sort of seemed like the stars aligned. I was able to have this concept that was pretty well baked, had a lot of thought behind it. But the thing that kind of unstales it, makes it like is collaboration. When you hand something off to someone and you trust those people to, bring their best work and bring their ideas, and there are things I never expected I'd see or never even thought about that are in the game because of Matt and his team. So I think that was a way to maybe knock the dust off the concept, if you will.
Great. And with the original idea, this is something I always like to ask developers, especially when we have ideas that are around for a long time or percolating. How much or has the game changed in any way from your original vision to where it is now, in terms of what you originally thought the game to be?
Yeah, it's yes and no. I mean, originally, and in all my original mock, everything that I worked on was 2D. It was like a 2.5D world, so everything was made out of like tin cutouts, and it had characters that could move on tracks and steer around, and it was going to be a twin stick shooter. I mean, I mean, the fundamental ideas were there, but what I think Matt and his team were able to kind of prove out, and especially when there was lots of iteration, lots of early just gray box testing of just trying out the mechanics, is like, well, the core idea was all right. The tracks meets twin stick worked out, but you really need the sort of the shape and size of the characters, so you kind of have something you're going to hit, something that looks good from the side and doesn't just look presentable from one angle, for instance. So I mean, that's just sort of necessary when you want to be able to use the entire space of the game, and to be able to have like just again those hit volumes for the characters that feel really good. So yeah. I'm not sure if that answers the question, but you know, but I talked some.
There we go. The people listening, they just want to hear us rant about design for an hour or two. They don't need to they don't hear, or they don't need to know if we make any sense or not. As long as we just talk and keep them entertained, they'll be happy. We gotta starve off that madness just a little while longer. I guess another question regarding Bartlow then. With that, I was saying this a few minutes ago, I love that kind of like diegetic design, like where it feels like everything is like a real thing, where it's built within the world itself. Were there any other, like I can think of a few examples in my mind, were there any games that kind of inspired you in terms of creating that look of an old style arcade machine?
I mean, it was literally old style arcade machines. You know, if you look at things from like these old school mechanical museums, and places that have old school, like you know, like that again, the sort of tin toy coin op thing. I mean, literally the penny arcade. You know, the original of what that means. Those were always, and I've always been kind of like a huge fan of just kind of weird, obscure, strange history as well. And you know, designing games and doing those for a number of years, I guess it sort of seemed like a cool way to mix together some things I was interested in, but kind of surface it, you know, as a video game.
Yeah, and I know when I did a presentation about the history of the arcade machine, and I remember looking up like kind of like the first generation, like those old school machines. And like for myself, I always love that kind of like look and feel to it. When you have like, when you can see everything kind of working to produce it, as opposed to it all just being abstracted or hidden behind the scenes.
Sure. Yeah.
I think one of the most interesting things to build, like from a game design perspective, was just like the UIs. Because if you think about UIs, they tend to do a lot of things that are sort of ethereal. Like they highlight things, or they have cursors, and you know, one of the most interesting design problems I think we tackled is in the character select and the outfitter, where you equip new items and equipment on your character and buy them in the store. We had like it's a co-op game, so there's two cursors that need to move around, but we wanted to make them mechanical. We wanted to make them function, so we had to design this really complex machinery, basically, very like, to allow two cursors to pass over the top each other in a way that they exist on the same spot, where one, you could see both cursors, and two, they weren't like clipping through each other, and they could move in any direction. So it's like an omnidirectional system that allows the cursors to move in any direction and pass over the top of each other. You know, just things like that. Even the tracks. One thing we discovered, you know, originally we had it so the characters blocked each other. So if like you're playing with a buddy and they're on the same track as you, you couldn't go. But we found out that wasn't fun, right? People want too much. It felt a little cumbersome. So then we designed this like mechanical system to let the characters sort of lean away from each other, so they could like squeeze by each other on the same track. And that was just like, but you know, in a normal game you just let them walk through each other. But you know, you don't want to do that in this particular game. So it was a real interesting design problems that you normally wouldn't have to face, that were really fun to sort of dive into.
Yeah, and I think that actually made the UI really good. I mean, I really like how it's turned out, and again, it's sort of like I was saying before, that tactile feel, the notion that everything has a physical presence, but it also means when you push a button or change focus, there's always feedback. You always, I mean, it's just basic design. It's not like unique to this necessarily, but I think it makes a stronger design. It makes a better user experience when the game is always indicating what you've done to it by by showing something. I mean, I know it's pretty fundamental, but the fact that we had to sort of underline that really carefully because of the mechanical stuff, I think it really yielded some really good things. I really like how it I don't know, plays and feels.
And as a quick tangent, because I know the person who asked is about to leave, what game engine are you using for Bartlow?
It's Unity 3D. Although in order to really get the best out of Unity, one thing that we were really able to leverage is we had made that VR game in the past for PlayStation VR, Bout of Blood, and VR is hard in general to get performance, to get frame rate, to really make things run well, and that game was probably the hardest game you could make in a lot of ways, in that it's like a flying game, huge long draw distances where you can't just fog things out, so it's just technically real challenging. And so we did a ton of modifications and built a ton on top of Unity to get it to run fast. And we were able to leverage that for Dread Machine, and even like because of that, we have like fully destructible environments where you could literally blow up every single object in the whole game. We're able to do like really crazy things with lighting, where every projectile can have a light. We're able to do like all these things that we couldn't do otherwise, simply because we put so much time into performance in our past game. So I think it's we're really going to be able to push the envelope there. And if you do have a high-end PC, my buddy was telling me the game was running at like 1,000 frames a second. So and it's still going to run silky smooth on consoles as well. So
nice. And getting back to kind of talking about the UI and kind of the tactile nature, because I think that's another very fascinating topic, and it's one that, like, to me, it always seems like one of those aspects that kind of separates like good design from really great design, when the UI is on point from both the UI standpoint and as well as the GUI standpoint. And obviously with something like Bartlow, as you guys said, like, this is supposed to mirror a machine that I'm sure there wasn't a machine like that in real life, but something that could exist like that. And I think that kind of, I'm not sure if we had this discussion, Clayton, or I had with somebody else. So I know we kind of talked about or something about kind of how the aesthetics can sometimes define the design and vice versa in something like this.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's kind of like a two-way street, because I think you start off with something that you might think of as just being more like an art direction choice, but it does sort of backflow onto the sort of mechanical, logical side of things, and I think it should. I think it's I don't know if you and I talked about this, but I mean, just kind of historically, I think there's a couple things that are always kind of like they're sometimes termed like the Cinderella of game development, and that one of which is the audio. Like suddenly things are fun when you get audio feedback, when you do stuff, when something gets hit and it just sounds really good, or you click a button, and UI kind of falls into the same category. I think they used to be, at least I think less so today, underestimated. They are sort of like, because everyone's bored, no one wants to do buttons, but it's a creative opportunity that should not be missed, because you can bring people into your game world, the look and feel, the style of it, even before they ever see the game, with a really good front end, really good UI design. It's that's something I firmly believe in, and Matt's team again is just like, I see more time and effort going into something like, the character equipment you're talking about, the idea that it's the haberdashers and there's top hats and all sorts of things you can just selling that idea, the concept of it, so you are charmed by what you see before you even start actually playing. I don't know, people can tell when a game isn't loved. you know,
Definitely.
you know, there's sort of a stink on it. You know, it's kind of like, oh, someone, you know, maybe really hard, maybe they spend a ton of money, but if it wasn't loved, it comes across. And I think the best things I've ever worked on are the things where, so it's that time and effort just to make a little fitting that goes around the corner of a panel where you might want to buy an elixir for your, you know, your 1907 character. That's where you can kind of feel that attention to detail.
Yeah, definitely.
Wow, I really got up on a soapbox there. I'm going to have a sip of water to reward myself.
There you go.
Well done.
And we were just having this conversation this past weekend. Like, there was the Steam Spring Festival of Games going, where they were showing off like all these indie games, like as free demos. And as we were playing them on stream, like you can, as you said, Clayton, you can really tell when the developers, you know, really loved that idea. It's really, you can see that in the design and the UI. We played this game that was based, I think, heavily on, I think it was Indian mythology. And yeah, I beat Zach to that in chat. And like, you can tell, I think, very quickly in some of these games when the developers really wanted to make this game. Like, nothing feels out of place. Nothing seems like they just said, oh, we'll save that for, you know, 2 days before release. That's when we'll work on it.
Yeah.
And the UI, I think, has always been, and like you said, like, UI is, I think, for a lot of people, often seen as, like, the busy work, like, alongside doing marketing and PR for a developer. Again, you want to see things explode or make crazy things happen. You don't want to think about, okay, what button is the player going to press to start this game, or what's going to be the shoot button. But
yeah,
it is very important, I feel, and I'm sure you guys agree with this, to make sure that your UI is on point. And like, for me, like, I just wrote a piece about this, about what I look for in a game, and playability more and more for me is my number one thing. Like, if the playability aspects of your game are bad, I will, you know, the hammer comes down, like, when I start talking about that game. And if it's great, I can oftentimes overlook smaller issues or other things if I'm enjoying the moment-to-moment gameplay of it. Yeah,
true.
Exactly, Zach.
People can. I think we can all forgive a lot if the game compensates in other ways. You know, no game is. Few games, I should say, are perfect. But yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. I guess for both of you, then, like, with, like, yeah, I know, Shark. Like, with the UI of Bartlow, I guess, obviously, as we said, the design and the aesthetics are kind of married with a game like this. Were there, like, different iterations that you were thinking about as you were designing it? Or was this one of those cases where once you kind of settled on the design idea or the core gameplay loop, everything else kind of started to fall into place?
But I think there's always a lot of, you know, I'm somebody that believes a lot in iteration. That said, I do think that, like, we established a really strong core early on, and I think I remember the time Clayton came over and started playing and said, "This is the first time I've had fun playing the game," right? And I think that up to that point there was just a ton of iteration of, like, how do we make track movement feel good? How do we make, you know, how do we tune the aiming to feel good? How do we do all that stuff? But the second we got to that point in the prototype, because that's really early on where everything was still gray box, you know, at least I feel like from there on it really was sort of things falling into place and really just moving forward with that thing we've already proven. We're like, wow, this is fun in gray box. It doesn't have sound yet. It doesn't have effects yet, and it's already fun. Now when we add all that stuff, and it's just going to be better. And you know, and obviously there's little iterations from that on. Like I mentioned, how the characters originally couldn't walk through each other. You know, that you get from playtesting. You just learn things about, like, how people play or what people want, and then you adapt. But I think the core concept really was strong enough where it just, a lot of the things were just supporting it.
Anything you want to add, Clayton?
Yeah, no, I think Matt summed it up really well. I was just kind of thinking back on how the deployment system and things like that. That I think kind of across all disciplines. Yeah, I mean, if you think of it, the UI. I remember there was that list of things we wrote, Matt. We're like, okay, nothing just pops into existence. Everything has to come out of something, unfold, or have be on a strut or a gear or a wire. And I remember, I think that also informed like even how things appear in the game itself, like the idea that there's a stage set that just drops into place and unrolls, and you can sort of see the floor tiles clicking into place. I mean. I think some of that thinking started with the UI in some ways, and maybe I don't know if maybe it was a two-way street there, Matt, but it seems like those things kind of fed off each other.
For sure. I mean, in the end, we knew we wanted everything to be mechanical, and that's why like our UI is 3D. It's in the world. It's part of the game. We didn't go 2D with it. And same thing with like Clayton mentioned, the level creation. You'll see the sky that normally, or the background. Like a lot of games will have like a background or whatever. You see it unroll on two rolls with like fabric in between, and you can see it like the gears spinning to move it along. And if you're someone that makes games, a lot of the time you'll notice that we're exposing a lot of that behind the scenes with these mechanics of like, yeah, this is sort of what the code's doing. It's moving this background from right to left. When we load a save point or a checkpoint, you're seeing in a way what the code's doing, because you'll see us like build the level out of all these parts, because the machine's literally building and then it's like removing parts of the level to get you back to the state where you were before in that boss fight where half the room was destroyed. So you get to see it sort of like the machine literally play out the code that's normally behind the scenes with these mechanics. So it is sort of all UI. It is sort of all interconnected in that it's it's all part of this machine. It's all part of this game. Even the depth that we allow for the play spaces, we've been very careful to make sure that like, hey, would this fit in the box, right? Because there's a literal box. The camera moves. We don't ever move the camera. We move the play space. So if you like, the machine has these two big arms coming and just rotate the whole board so you can get a different perspective. So we can make you have like an overhead shooter moment or a behind the shoulder moment. But it really is the UI, the machine itself, doing all these things and manipulating the board. Just because you're going to be looking in that arcade cabinet, and that's the feel, that's the core of the experience we're giving you.
Yeah, and as we were talking earlier about like games that did like diegetic UIs and diegetic design, like one of my favorites was like the Paper Mario franchise by Nintendo.
Oh yeah. And that's a good point. Yeah, I totally forgotten about that. Yeah.
And I always love it when games really do try and marry their UI to the gameplay itself, and it's something that I don't know. Like, didn't really. I think like early, like I'm talking, like first generation games and consoles. Like, it wasn't really something that a lot of people thought about, and I think it's one of the things that kind of became more respected and more implemented, probably from like the mid '90s onward.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was just thinking back to way back when I worked on RTS games, and how the thinking then was, of course, this was the '90s, so there weren't a lot of like floating diaphanous, HUDs. It was everything was a dashboard, and it really it was sort of like that was it, we were still sort of in a way it was unintentionally something that was physical, because I think everything was still sort of an analog to what people would relate to in the real world. So yeah, there's got to be a dashboard, and it's got to have a button on it, and the button's all bevelly looking, and so it's kind of funny how, I don't know, it was something that we did because that's what most games in the genre that we were working in did. Now it's a creative choice. I don't know. It's kind of interesting how the context has changed. I'm not sure I have a real point there apart from just talking about old games a little bit.
Yeah, I think I always love it when games are a bit seamless, and like I think one of my favorite games of all time, maybe my favorite, is Prince of Persia: Sands of Time, and I love that. Even because, like, when you die in that game, the character's like, oh, wait, that's not how it happens. And he's telling the story the whole time. It's all part of the same experience. And I think that's really great, when you can take that fantasy and just take it to the extremes where you're never really breaking the player out of that fantasy.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I don't know if you guys saw the game Hades by Supergiant Games. They've been working on that for like the past year, I think year and a half by now. And one of the things I really love about that game is that it brings that seamlessness of the whole roguelike gameplay loop into the lore. That you can live, die, repeat because you're a demigod. It makes perfect sense. Like there's never really a game over screen because you technically can't die.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and I was remembering, I think one that I would love as a kind of a mini tangent, I would love to see more games really try and, I guess, integrate like the storyteller, like the narrator in the games as more of an interaction. Like, as you said with the Prince of Persia, like maybe having like the narrator affect the story or change things and have things like be altered going forward. There was this game, Call of Juarez, I think 3 or 2. It was one of the games in that series where the main character narrates everything, and then like the game space would change based on him like misremembering or altering like the story, which I really love that idea.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Now, with Bartlow, in terms of like the gameplay itself, what kind of I guess skill level are you aiming for? Is this going to be more on the hardcore side, as we say, like the Contra like, or will it be something more manageable for like new players?
I mean, it's hard. I would qualify that, Matt. You can speak to this better than I can, but my feeling is that the game is that easy to pick up and play, really approachable, inputs. You'll be right at home, just moving the character and shooting. But I'd say after you get familiar with things, we bring some challenge, and I feel like if you're not able to get through it, it's not like a muscle memory thing like Cuphead, for instance. It's not like you would go through and it's going to be exactly the same moves and exactly the same bullets and exactly the same jumps to get through an area. Things start off mechanically, but they actually unfold organically, if that makes sense, because the enemies all have their own behaviors that will vary somewhat from one play to the next. So there's one thing that means you're not always going to get exactly the same level every single time, but there's also sort of like this idea that you can grind for the pennies, because of course this is 1907, so I think a revolver cost like $7 that year.
Ooh.
So you're literally getting pennies as you play, and then those can go when you go to equip your character. There are things that you can actually get in the to like upgrade weapons and upgrade what they're wearing, so you can get over those hurdles, I think, by sheer grindiness, I guess, persistence. So, Matt, I don't know, did I sum it up well? Can you sum it up better?
I think you did. Like, even on our own team, we have like some pretty wide berth of skill level in this type of game. I can usually get through a level on first try. Part of that's probably because I built a lot of the levels, but I'm pretty good at this type of game. And then we have other people that are very bad at it, and I think that as Clayton said, one thing is like if you play through a couple times, you'll be able to upgrade a little bit to help you, so that it sort of makes up for maybe a lack of skill in some areas or something you might not be as good at. But also, like, while the level does change a little bit to keep it fresh, just where the enemies shoot, they have their own behaviors, as Clayton said. But I think also, like, you learn enough and you can get good enough at a level where, like, by the third or fourth time, we find that most people get through. And we're still trying to dial that in and make it, really get it exactly right. But I think it is, accessible enough for people that aren't really great at bullet hells, but it's going to give everybody a challenge.
Yeah. And what you guys said about having the enemies have their own AI or behavior, that's one of the major differences. Like when we look at, like going back to Contra, for instance, in Contra, every enemy has a fixed pattern. Every bullet is kind of predicted based on that. It's one of the major things why it's so popular as a speedrun game, as you can just kind of train yourself to know exactly where everything's going to be, and then it's just about pure sheer execution. Similar to that with Cuphead, although Cuphead does feature random patterns in terms of the boss. Like, you don't know exactly what they're going to do. But
right.
It's like the whole like run and gun genre. I think this is another interesting question for both of you. Like, we were talking about this on stream like several times when we play a lot of the old school games about trying to elevate classic or arcade designs. And with something like Bartlow, you already mentioned, of course, having the persistent elements to it. I guess, are there any areas where you kind of felt that you could either change or elevate, like that kind of run and gun style gameplay?
Yeah, I think there's some things about it I think that are our own wrinkles, if you will. It's on one level it's absolutely classic arcade kind of feel. And one thing I mentioned earlier is the fact that it is three-dimensional. So even though you're playing a two-dimensional game, I sometimes I've called it a box perspective shooter. I mean, the idea that you're in this little diorama, and then if you're on one extreme corner and there's guys coming at you from the other extreme corner, and you hit them, you feel like you've done something. You feel like you actually have skill. And so I really enjoy that aspect of it. So it's sort of like and then there are things like, okay, I can just move down these tracks and I can turn, I can shoot like Robotron. There's guys coming after me, but suddenly the ranged opponents show up, and then suddenly the choice of track becomes more vital. Suddenly, if there's cover in the world, there will be objects, things like that. There's stage sets and little, trees and other things like that. You use those. You need to use those to sort of vary the outcome of what's going to happen during an encounter, and you can try different things each time you approach it if something is not successful. So I guess I feel like it's that interesting little wrinkle where we bring some of the classic 2D arcade mechanics into a somewhat more three-dimensional world.
Yeah, I think I've never seen like Robotron Pac-Man or Smash TV Pac-Man, that combination before, and I think it really, like, this whole idea of being stuck on a track, where but also, I mean, obviously you control your direction, which way we want to go, just like Pac-Man, but it adds a lot of interesting, it just feel and elements of the gameplay. There's a lot of games where you can only move up or down or left or right, like Galaga or Contra, except for jump is basically left or right. But the tracks make it so you're sort of choosing, your angles of attack. And if you ever seen somebody that's really, really good at play paintball, they'll often win by just being like aggressive and getting these angles and like going around the corner and like getting somebody at point blank range, like going around this cover. And it often feels, it has that sort of a frenetic aggressiveness sometimes in certain levels where like you're really like using these tracks to like quickly cut an angle off or quickly get in on a ranged enemy. It's really unique feeling. So I think I think it's a way of elevating the genre. It's just creating something unique, something that feels a bit different as well.
Yep, and I'm rewatching some of the footage from the trailer. So, like, what's kind of interesting is that you're able to move around the track. Like, it's not so much a case of like you're still limited by the track or the rails itself, but you are able to move back and forth, up and down, things along those lines. And I always find, like, I think that can be a very, like, polarizing element to some of these games where you kind of force the player not to have full interaction with the world. For my fans watching this live recorded, we played that game, what was it called? Papercraft RPG. Heroes of Legend, or something like that, where the main character only moves on the grid or the track that's laid out. And one of the issues that we were running into is that you always, Book of Demons, thank you, Zach, that when the enemies can attack you from basically any angle, but you are limited, it kind of feels like almost like the game has an unfair advantage for the player. And yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I played Book of Demons, so like I know exactly what you're talking about. I think that one of the big differences there is, one, like the way we've designed our enemy types and the way we've designed sort of the the way they behave, you can actually use the tracks a little bit like tower defense. We actually have like one of the weapons in the game is a radiation gun, and it like leaves enemies a pile of molten radiation that then other enemies will get damaged as they go through the track. So you can actually set up traps. And if you think of it at a meta level, if you were imagine like just change the art for a second, like throw the art out the window, and you think about an FPS, you're going down hallways, right? And then when you're in a hallway, if there's somebody at the end of the hallway, you're going to get shot, right? You use the corner of the hallway to sort of like use that as strategically as the cover. That's sort of more the strategic feel of the shooting. Is think of the tracks as like a bunch of hallways, right? And the cover is like the corners of the hallways, or the walls, I should say. And then you have destructible walls, and like you have like all the variants of that. That's sort of more the feel we went for. So we use the tracks as a almost a hallway system, and if we do allow an enemy to do something that, as you say, can attack from any angle or whatever, it's very intentional, right? Like we thought about that. We said, hey, in this particular case, we have enemies hanging from strings, so they're not on the track, and they can come from any angle, and we want that to be like this change up, this difference. But you could shoot in any direction, so you're not like, oh god, I can only shoot left and right, and you can still take them out. So that's the way we thought about that, to sort of get around that problem you're talking about, where it can feel unfair if you're more limited than the enemies you're fighting.
Yeah, and generally they have the same limitations you do, so it feels like mostly the playing field is sort of level, so to speak.
Yeah, very interesting about that, and it's always very cool to like hear about coming up with these ways of considerations or trying to get around some of these issues with it. Now, one thing that I was looking at with the footage is, of course, you have boss fights. And how do the boss designs kind of either adhere or break like the design of the game?
So I'm still sorry. I've been muting in between, so I had to make sure I'm unmuted. So one thing we really like to do with I like to do with the boss fights a lot is just sort of I don't like being unfair. So I think that our bosses are designed to sort of test the things we've taught you previously in the levels, right? It's like, hey, we taught you how to use levers and throughout this world. Let's have a boss that is really like there's a lot of lever puzzles and how you take them out, or like we have we've taught you about dodging hazards, so let's you have a boss that capitalizes on dodging hazards, and then the bosses build on each other so they can become more extreme, more more extreme from there. That's my general way of thinking about bosses, is just a sort of a combination of the mechanics you should have mastered by that point.
Yeah, it's not like you'd spring this completely unheard of thing you've never done before in a boss fight, which yes, is done in some games. I'm usually not a fan of that. And, so yeah, that's right. I mean, it really is what you play in the levels, but more like the thesis, the final, like we'll see what you got. Now
final
that we've taught you this
challenge,
stuff. Yeah, and some of them remind me a lot of Contra boss fights too, because sometimes we'll lock the camera and we have these giant things, and there's a whole lot of dodging and things coming at you from different directions, but we may actually keep you within a single screen worth of real estate at some time. So it does remind me of some of those old school boss fights.
I think also just like to talk about the emotional side of things for a second, just to get away from the mechanics. Boss fights also just supposed to be some kind of emotional like journey, right? Like, what is this boss? Why are you fighting it? Like, what led up to this moment? And I think that's something that like not a lot of bullet hells do. Not a lot of bullet hells necessarily even have an emotional journey, but it's something that I think that we are stealing from a lot of the new modern games like Castle Crashers, where there is a reason that boss exists, and there's a story, where it chased you throughout the level, or it's like, one of my favorite levels right now is this Western level that you walk into, and at the very beginning, you have these three sort of like, amigos come up, and they're like, oh, you're, say some scary bad guy lines. and then go off into town, and you're fighting your way through the town, and you meet each one of these 3 guys throughout the town and have sort of like a mini boss encounter. But it's all set up, it's all part of the story, and I really like doing that. Is sort of just having an emotional journey, having a story, having not only a mechanical payoff, but just a story payoff and a emotional payoff when you beat that boss. So that's something we're trying to do a lot.
Yeah, but again, it goes back to what we were saying earlier with trying to have everything feel connected. Like we said, making it feel like the developers loved this game. And like we've said, it's something that it's hard to do it right, but everyone knows it when it's not there.
Yep, for sure.
And I think what's very interesting what you were talking about, Matt, regarding the boss designs, because again, like for people watching me, we've played quite a bit of action-based games on this channel, and it's always very tricky to get that balance right between, do we just make this boss a bigger version of what you already did, or do we just go all out and make something completely new? But then you run that problem, as you said, that the boss basically doesn't follow any rules or guidelines the player has already figured out, and then turn that situation of, what am I supposed to do? Like, I've shot every enemy before, why is this guy not dying? So what did the developers change for this fight?
Yeah, I think you can take the mechanics the players already use and combine them in unique ways, and I think that's one way you can give the player something new without them feeling robbed. Also, just sometimes the presentation alone can make it feel new. I talk about like when I'm working with newer designers a lot. They often like will be like, "Well, I'm gonna make this enemy, and he pops up out of the ground," and I'll be like, "Oh, well, we already have a cover-based enemy that makes you change targets, right?" Because from a mechanical level, there could be a guy that like brings up a shield, or a guy that like goes underground, or a guy that has some kind of invulnerability state, right? And all those enemies are really the same enemy presented in a different way, right? And from a player perspective, they don't necessarily, it doesn't feel that way. But from a mechanical perspective, really what an invulnerable state in an enemy is trying to get you to do is change targets. You can't just burn that guy down. So like if you think about the ghost in Mario, I mean, you can't kill the ghost in Mario, but like imagine the ghost is invulnerable. You got to like constantly sort of like be interacting with that object while also interacting with other things. And I think that's a way to like take a boss and sort of like take some of those mechanics that and make them feel familiar, or new and exciting, even if they have learned sort of the general concept in the past.
Yeah, I always felt that some of the very best examples of like the late gun or the gun games from the arcade genre or the arcade age did that really well. Like games like House of the Dead, Time Crisis, and there were like hundreds and hundreds of those late gun style games. And the challenge was, of course, that the player's not changing what they're doing, so you have to figure out some way of, like we said, like either test the player or kind of take an existing mechanic and throw it on its side.
Yep.
Let me see. As a quick time check, we are a little bit over an hour after sound-related issues and just getting everything set up. I think I am just about out of like general questions. For the chat watching, if you have any questions regarding design, Bartlow, or anything else for Clay and Matt, let us know. And for you guys, are there any design topics or anything relating to Bartlow that we haven't discussed that you're interested in bringing up?
I mean, no, I'm good. And there's story stuff, but I think that's best left to just experiencing it in the game, really.
Yeah, there's a couple different layers of story. There's like a Scooby-Doo story, and then there's the deeper deeper layered story in there as well, like the story about the machine, the creator, just all these things. But I really don't want to give that stuff away because I think it's one of the payoffs and big rewards of the game. But I'm just excited to have another couch co-op game out there in the world, because some of my favorite games were always couch co-op, and I don't think there's enough of them. So hopefully people can sit down and play together and enjoy this.
I guess here's a question. Then we talked about the persistence systems already, with like saving your pennies, buying new weapons and stuff. Are there any kind of like new game plus or new challenges that can kind of test returning players?
Yeah, one of the big things is character unlocks. We unlock a lot of characters, and you can whole different play styles. So like if you unlock Annie Oakley, right? Like she has like a more of a sniper rifle kind of play style, and that's just another whole way to play the game. We're also looking at just how we'll do difficulty is something we're talking about. We'll release to people, but there will be some type of difficulty, at some point in the game's lifespan that will allow people to play through. Again.
Yeah, and so just to elaborate, then each of the characters that you play in Bartlow, they're going to be like different in terms of like the general shooting mechanic.
Yeah, just so every character in the game has a unique primary weapon that is upgradable.
Okay.
So you could buy secondary weapons for the characters in the store and such. But if you play Annie Oakley, she has a unique weapon that she uses and that upgrades throughout the game. And that really
lightning gun and yeah.
So every character will have this unique kind of play style just based on that primary weapon.
Okay. Sharky in chat asks, did you do anything special to take advantage of Steam's remote co-op couch feature? And if not, are you thinking about like any special features or anything unique with that implementation?
Honestly, we haven't got into the technical details of that implementation yet, and exactly how we'll handle it. So it's something that's on our radar and we want to do. So we just haven't got to that point yet.
All right. And to clarify for people watching, if we saw in the trailer that it's 2-player, is that going to be the limit for the number of players who can play the game at one time?
Yes.
Okay. Just want to make sure. All right. I think with that, I guess just some general wrap-up questions, and then I'll let you guys go for this very quiet Thursday evening here, or at least around here. So, as we said, you guys have been working on it for about 10 months now. Do you have an estimated or projected release date for it?
I think we've announced summer this year.
Yep.
All right. And what platforms will it be available on?
Steam and Xbox. Oh. And then from there, we'll, if assuming people like it, we can go to other platforms as well.
Alright, so I guess with that, any final points about Bartlow, design, anything like that you guys want to talk about? If not, we can say our goodbyes.
Alright, I guess, just hope people check it out and wishlist it on Steam if you want to not forget about us, and, we'll keep sending out new information as we work on the game.
Yep.
Alright.
What he said.
Have you guys thought about building an actual dread machine now that you guys have done it all?
Yes, we have. I think we're going to murder ourselves like our fictional creator did if we do. But the idea of building at least a lit cabinet that sort of approximates it, I really want to do that. But
I think I was determined to build it and take it to GDC before it got canceled. But say la vie.
I would love to see that myself. I would just love have on my portrait just giant box of lights and flashing out there.
There's still PAX West, So yeah.
I never know.
Yeah. We still kill ourselves doing that. Yeah.
I know, right? I really want to. We'll see.
Just make sure to finish the digital game first. That's the most important thing.
Exactly.
Yes.
So, with that, for the people watching, any social media, website links, anything like that you would like to plug before I let you go?
Yeah, I mean, there's the main game site, which is dreadmachine.com, and there's links there to our Steam store, and there's trailers and screenshots and things like that if you want to take a look at that. And then, yeah, that's also has links to, we're on the usual, we got some Twitter stuff, there's a Facebook page, and all the usual stuff. So, yeah.
All right.
Yep, and we're always on Discord, so if people want to just drop it in chat, we'd love to talk to them.
Yep, there's the Bartlow Dread Machine, Discord.
Yeah. Right. And if people want to follow you guys, what would be like the best like Twitter wise to do?
Well, if anyone can spell my last name based on me saying it, although it's probably showing up, it's here in the channel. I'm just C Kozleric at C Kozleric on Twitter.
Yeah, and you can just Tribe Toy on Twitter is the company. I don't really do Twitter as an individual very much, so I actually the company account is me though, so I will talk to you guys.
Right. And I'll include links for like Twitter and social media in the description down below for people watching the recorded version of this.
Great, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right, guys, with that, I think we'll wrap things up for this cast. Clayton and Matt, it was a pleasure hanging out with you. And Clayton, hopefully we can get another chat before another 3 years have passed. We'll see.
Yeah, hopefully it'll be a less interesting 3 years.
Yeah, well, let's hope on that one. Maybe for the next chat you'll have the actual Dread Machine build. We can talk about barely surviving making it.
Yes, I'll tell you why it was a terrible idea.
There you go. There's your post-mortem. There's your next GDC talk right there.
Awesome.
All right, guys. With that said, we're going to be wrapping things up for our cast. For those of you watching this live or recorded, thank you for tuning in. If you are new, check out the Discord and Patreon link down below. Patreon supporters get early and ad-free access to our design talks, and also helps things out here. I am on Twitter at GWBlazer. That's the best way to find me. And I rant about game design on a day-to-day basis. So, Clay and Matt, once again, thanks for coming on. Best of luck with the Dread Machine, and I'm sure we'll be all looking forward to it this summer.
Oh, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Have a good one.
Yep. Alright, guys, that's it for the cast. Have a great rest of your night. For those of you watching this live, I will be back on later tonight for our regular game stream, but come back for daily discussions on game design here and on game wisdom, where we examine the art and science of games. Until next time, take care.